Hey there and welcome to behind the scenes on how I create my 3D animated videos. So far I've been animating for about a year and a couple of months on YouTube, and I've gotten a few questions on how I create my videos and what type of programs that I use. So I decided to make a video explaining my process, answering some of the questions I typically get. If you have any specific questions or want me to get into more detail about anything, then you can just message me on any of my social media accounts. I'm always happy to answer any questions that you might have. So yeah, let's start the video. First, let's talk about my equipment. As of today, I use a sweet 9-year-old Dell desktop computer, which I desperately need to update. Attached to this beast of a computer are two 24-inch monitors. I'm also equipped with this fabulous Wacom Indigo 4 tablet for when I need to doodle on Photoshop or Illustrator. I have this Wacom Cintiq Companion 1 mainly to record my audio because you could barely hear the fan, and I use it to paint in Photoshop when I'm out and about. Talking about recording, I use this Blue Yeti to record my audio. I know, very unique. Now to my software. With anything in 3D, I prefer to use 3D Studio Max. For texturing, I mainly use Photoshop. For audio recording, I use the famous Audacity. For writing my scripts, I use Microsoft Word. And for video editing, visual effects, and compositing, I use Adobe After Effects. How does everything come together? The first thing that happens is I get an idea for a video. Anything that I find interesting or even what I consider to be funny. For example, the lunchtime video, that idea came to me at work when a coworker asked if I wanted to break for lunch. And I legit said, "Lunch!" And at that moment I thought, oh, this is a great idea for a really funny video. I mean, I consider it to be funny. Once I have an idea, I start writing the script. I tend to keep it in a typical script format. I add dialogue, camera cuts, and descriptions of the scene. Basically anything that will help me when I start laying out my shots. After my shots has been looked over by my wife and two best friends, then I go ahead and record my audio. When I record my audio, I try my best to be confident and genuine as possible. I think I still need a little bit more work in this department, but I could truly see improvement comparing my latest video to my first. After I've done recording, it's time to improve my voice. I apply a noise reduction, a compressor effect, and then the normalizing effect. I don't know if this is the best way to improve recording, but I saw this in a YouTube tutorial, so that's what I'm doing. After that, I cut up the audio and number it to its respective scene. So when the audio is set and done, I'll start making a list of assets for me to model. Typically, I will model anything that will be needed, but in some cases, if it saves me time, I'll go to a site like TurboSquid and see if the 3D models are ready in their sites. What's a 3D model? A 3D model is a process of creating a 3D representation of any surface or object by manipulating polygons, edges, and vertex in the simulated 3D space. Basically, if you move a dot, line, or polygon in a correct way, you can make a car, a plane, a person, or anything you can imagine. If I need to create a person, I use the Fern model as a base model. I could change the clothes, glasses, or even the hair. I do this because the model is already fully rigged, and it makes making people easier since all the rigging stuff is already applied. If you don't know what's a rig, it's basically the skeleton of a model. Animators use the bones to move and pose the character however they want it. Once I have all the assets ready, then I can move on to the layout / 3D animatics / editing stage. I have a scene template that I have all my lighting and all my parameters all set up. In some scenes, I normally have just two light sources. One regular spotlight with an area shadow parameter on it, and a skylight to give the scene a universal brightness. I use a default scanline to render out all my scenes, and I set my frame rate at 12 frames per second. The main reason for animating at 12 frames per second is because of time. At 12 frames per second, I have less frames to animate, and rendering the scene is a whole lot faster. Plus, I like the style of the animation. So with all the parameters set, I take the cut up audio and place it in the 3D scene along with whatever 3D model is needed. Depending on how I'm feeling, I could roughly pose Fern or just leave him in a T-pose. If the scene requires a complex set of movements like fighting, then I do a rough animation just to get the timing all out. When everything is said and done, I do a quick render with no shadows or skylight on. It's just something quick and dirty so I could get the renders out and place it on its own composition in After Effects. When the renders are in After Effects, I change the composition frame to 24. I do this because it holds each frames on 2s. In my opinion, it gives the animation a bit more of a personality. Also, this is way more forgiving than animating in 24. After all the scenes are laid out and I'm happy with the 3D animatic, I could send it to Chris so he could work his magic and add a soundtrack to the video. Then it's time for the fun part, animation. Since it's just me animating and I have a full-time job and a family that I need to attend to, I try to be as efficient as possible with my animation process. I know many different ways to animate, but I found that the most efficient method specifically for YouTube is to work with 100 frames at a time. I animate the body first, then sync the lips to the audio. When I'm happy with the results, I move on to the next 100 frames. This keeps me focused on a small section of the animation instead of feeling overwhelmed with a large scene. To make my life a little bit easier, I use this amazing plugin called Style Pose Manager, which really helps me out by giving me the ability to save poses so that I could use it over and over again. This definitely speeds up my animation process. If there are multiple characters in a scene, I normally animate the main character first. I then hide the rig of the main character and animate the second character reacting to the main character. I find this less overwhelming than animating both characters at the same time. One of the fun things about animating in 3D is problem solving. How can you get that shot you really want and still be within the limits of your character or rig? One really good example of this is the lucky character in my Valentine's Day video. That was one of the scenes where I have to get really creative to pull it off. To you, it might look simple, but behind the scenes, it had me scratching my head, wondering how the heck I was going to pull off this scene. The main problem was that his arms was way too short for him to actually pull the bow. So I had to play around with the camera placement and his pose, just so that I could make him look like he was actually pulling the bow and arrow. This is how the actual body looked when the camera isn't in the right place. Once I deemed the scene to be fully animated, I rendered the animation and overwrite the previous render, and reviewing the animation in After Effects. If I like what I see, then the scene is completely done. If not, then I go back and change whatever I need to change. When every scene has been animated, I'll move on to the high-res rendering stage. For YouTube videos, I tend to stay with a 2-render pass, diffuse and ambient occlusion, AO for short. Diffuse pass is a full-color rendering of the scene, and the AO creates a realistic shadow based on the lighting in the scenario. The diffuse pass is decent on its own, but if I really want the character to look nice, then adding an AO pass really does the trick. When setting up my diffuse pass, I turn on the area shadow parameters on my spotlight, and I turn on the skylight so that I could get a really nice look in my scene. I do random renders of different frames just to see if it looks good throughout. After all the lighting are set, I decide whether I'm going to render the character with the backgrounds or not. It really comes down to the camera. If the camera is stationary, then I'll just render the character's animation and then render one frame of the background. This really saves me a lot of time in the rendering process. If the scene has a moving camera, then I render the camera with the background. This makes my life a lot easier in the compositing phase of the video because I don't have to match the background with the animation. I actually tried doing this in one of my videos. I don't know if anyone caught it, but I did it for this scene, and it really did not turn out too good. Rendering time could vary depending on what's in the scene. With just the Fern character, it normally takes 3 seconds per frame to render. But with a full background and multiple character, it could easily range from 15 seconds to 2 minutes a frame. For the ambient occlusion pass, it is strictly just for characters. If I apply ambient occlusion on a full environment, then the render will take way too long. With one character, the render time is usually 1 minute and 15 seconds per frame. With multiple characters, it could easily go up to 2 minutes per frame or even more. Just imagine a whole environment, I could easily see 5 to 7 minutes per frame. This is when animating 12 frames per second comes into play. Less frames means less time for scenes to fully render, which is a big plus in my book. So now we press render and wait for all the scenes to finish. 5 years later. So yeah, when everything has finally rendered, I import the AO pass into the After Effects file. I then place the AO pass on top of the diffuse pass, set the AO pass to a multiply layer, and bring down the opacity to 80%. If it's one of the scenes where I rendered the background separate, then I add the background to the composition for the final look. When I need to add special effects to the scene, I tend to use some pre-made special effects from RTFX. This helps me use some really cool special effects without putting in the extra work. I then add sound effects. I recently started using Epidemic Sound Library to add sound effects to my videos. Adding sound effects really gives the video a really nice feel to it. Then the final step is to add the background music that Chris provided. Once that's done, I create the intro and the end card, and the video is complete. Here is what my After Effects project typically looks like when everything is done. I tend to keep all the shots rendered in its own folder and have all their shots in their own composition, so when I need to fix something, I know exactly where to look at. When everything is set and done, I render out the video and re-watch it multiple times to see if I catch anything that I could quickly change. I'm only human, and things tend to make it to the final video, which I normally catch when the video goes live. Also, here are some shots in different stages of the video. The switch and the broom. And like the avatar, she wasn't afraid to use them all. With all my videos, I tried my best to incorporate something that I never animated before. It could be a fight scene, transformation of some kind, or having a massive battle with superpowers. I love animating, and this channel really helps me get my creative juice flowing. I hope you all enjoyed this little insight into my process and hopefully inspired someone to create content of their own. If you have any questions about animation or my process, just hit me up in the comments or just message me on my other social media accounts. If you haven't done so already, feel free to check out my other videos on this channel. Also, please consider pressing that red subscribe button to help this channel grow. Thank you so much for watching and have a Ferntastic day.